Good morning, councillors. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, any members of the public listening in. Welcome to this video conference meeting of the Children, Young People and Family Support, Scrutiny and Policy Development Committee. My name is John Turner, the Democratic Services Officer for the meeting, and I'm assisted by my colleague Kate Sheldon, who will be hosting the meeting. The meeting is a public meeting and, in alignment with the new regulations which permits meetings to be held by remote means, will be live streamed for the public to view. Can I ask people to keep themselves on mute during the meeting when they're not speaking, and indicate to the chair via the chat facility when they wish to speak? One further point for members of the public, mainly, if you may see councillors and officers looking to the left and right of the screens during the meeting, they're not being distracted in any way. They're merely looking at paperwork on other devices. I'll now hand you over to the chair of the meeting, Councillor McRooney.
Thank you, John. Good morning to colleagues, and good morning to any members of the public that may be listening and watching this morning. I will, as we normally do, go around the screen and introduce ourselves, just in case there's anybody watching, and just in case they haven't met us or don't know who we are. So I'm going to start with no particular order other than the way that they appear in front of me on the screen, and I'm going to start with Kate.
Morning, I'm Kate Sheldon, Member Support and Civic Manager, and the host of the meeting this morning.
And as John said, I am Councillor McRooney, and I chair this meeting amongst other things. Alison.
Good morning, my name is Alison Teal and I'm one of the councillors for Nether-Edge and Shallow.
Thank you. And we'll go with Alison Warner this time.
I'm Alison Warner. I'm a school governor and attend this meeting.
How many Alices have we got? This is Alice Nicholson, just in case there's another Alice somewhere.
No, I think there's only one Alice today. I'm Alice Nicholson, Policy and Improvement Officer, supporting this committee.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, John? You're next on my list.
Nothing to add. John Turner, Democratic Services. Good morning.
Jackie Drayton.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Jackie Drayton. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Families. Thank you. I'm just not a member of the board. I'm here for paper later. Thank you.
Jim the Beard Stanky.
Morning, Councillor Jim Stanky, Councillor for Nether-Edge and Shallow.
Thank you very much. Anne.
Councillor Anne Murphy, Councillor for Crooks and Crosspull.
Mike.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Chaplin. I'm a councillor for Southey Ward.
And if I can ask Councillor Oxley to break himself off from his football commentating duties, that would be good.
Off there. Councillor Kevin Oxley from Mosborough Ward, currently directing airport controls.
Thank you. Sam.
Morning, Sam Evans, Darcy representative.
Colin.
Councillor Colin Ross, Councillor for Dore and Totley Ward.
And Cliff. Can't hear you, Cliff, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Cliff Woodcraft, Councillor for Fulwood.
And Joe?
Yeah, Councillor Jonathan Dore and Totley.
Thank you. Gary?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Councillor Galloway the Roll for Shea Green and Brightside Ward.
Mike?
Councillor Mike Lever, member for West Ecclesfield and Vice Chair of this committee.
And Helen?
Good morning, my name's Helen Sweeten. I'm an officer presenting a paper this morning on the mast update on behalf of John McElway.
Thank you very much. And Alison, you can have another go if you want to say hello again. Teal. Alison Teal, last no. Okay. Francine. Nice to see you.
Hello. Yes, sorry I was a bit late.
It's all right. Do you want to tell us who you are?
Oh, okay. My name's Francine Johnson. I'm a councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Donwood.
Jack?
Good morning. I'm Jack Scott. I'm a councillor for Park and Arbourthorne Ward.
Andrew?
Good morning. I'm Andrew Jones. I'm an officer. I'm the Director of Education and Skills, and I'm here to support my colleague Rose in presenting a paper to the committee.
And last but by no means least, Rosemary, unless somebody else is hiding from me.
Hi, morning everybody. I'm Rose Ward and I'm here to present a paper on elective home education. I'm interim head of service for access and inclusion in the local authority.
Thank you very much. Just bear with me while I get back to the agenda because it's on my other device. So housekeeping arrangements. Well, I think you really ought to know where your kettle and toilets are. So we'll pass that. Apologies for absence, John.
Chair, I've had apologies from Peter Naldret, the parent governor, and Alice Riddell, Health Watch observer.
Thank you. We have been asked, Alice, to move the agenda around. At what point do you want to do that? Do you want to do that now?
We could do if that suits Rose and Andrew better. You could do the minutes later if you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean it's not important that they're here to hear the minutes, is it?
No, because in fact some of the stuff in the minutes I can do as part of the work programme item anyway. Okay. So yes.
Right. So in order to accommodate various double bookings and all sorts of things, we're moving the elective home education to the first item. Is that correct, Alice? Okay. And Rosemary looks as though she's just. Did you know that, Rosemary? Did you know that we're going to do that to you?
I'm prepared. I am prepared. Don't worry. I'll let Andrew go first.
You look slightly shocked.
No, I'm fine.
Any declarations? John says I've got to do that before we actually start. Any declarations of interest on today's agenda? No. Okay. Rosemary, off you go.
I'll just introduce the item, Chair, if I can first, which is just that we've been to scrutiny on previous occasions in relation to elective home education, and clearly it's an area of work within the education department in terms of interest to this committee. Since we came here last time, which is about, it was in 2019, obviously the pandemic's intervened and there's been a significant increase in the numbers of children who are now electively home educated, and one of the reasons that they cite for that is concerns around infection rates and the pandemic itself. So we're here to present a paper today which just explains some of the data and the current numbers around that, just to talk to the committee about what we've done to respond to that, and then what we're planning to do to respond to that in the future. So with that, I'll hand over to Rose.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So obviously we've had the paper where I've tried to set out all of our statutory duties as a local authority regarding elective home education. And I just wanted to go through some of the additional activities that we've undertaken because of the pandemic and because of lockdown, and then some of the other risks that we know we may face in terms of as the pandemic and the lockdowns, we start to come out of the other side of it, given the recent announcements. So just say, obviously, and it's outlined in the paper that in 2018 we revised our approach to elective home education, and we devised a policy that was specific to Sheffield City Council rather than just using the national DFE guidance as our policy. We did this to ensure ourselves that off-rolling wasn't practiced across our schools and within our city, and to also ensure that we were adhering to our safeguarding duties as a local authority regarding children who were electively home educated. But prior to the review of the guidance in April 2019, we already built in we tried to build in annual contact with all of our families, but now it is written in the DFE guidance that we should be doing at least annual contacts with families, even where we have no concerns of their education or any other concerns for that matter. So we reviewed our policy again in line with lockdown and the review of the guidance, and then we changed our approach because obviously we couldn't get out to see our families who were electively home educating, so we had to move everything into a virtual world. So we've been very reliant on phone calls, Zoom meetings, Teams meetings, but we've continued to maintain that contact as best we can through other means. And where we felt that it's been needed, we have undertaken like doorstep visits or garden visits, but in line obviously with social distancing. So in line with everything that I've set out in the report, we've also had written communications out to all of our home educating community where we've outlined the support services that are available, because sometimes they may get missed in communication, because obviously the natural route into accessing support services across early help is usually through schools, and with not having that access, then we've made sure that they've had a copy of numbers, names and who to contact should they need support. We quickly redeployed our attendance legal obviously ceased over from the first lockdown, so we deployed the resource from our attendance legal team to actually help with contacts and communications with home educating families, to make sure not to over scrutinise, but just to make sure that they knew that we were there just as much for them as we were for any other child that was on a school roll, and for any parents in need of support. We've contacted via emails or phone calls, we've had letters out, again, and it's been trying to be reassuring, not to be scrutinising. We've then deployed an inclusion officer on a more permanent basis into elective home education, because obviously there's been a significant rise in the numbers of families choosing to home educate. So we've had to deploy also teachers from other areas of the authority. So the autism team has helped us with some of the curriculum oversight and overview that families have been submitting. And then we've just more recently been through our portfolio leadership and had signed off by APSAM, our elected member, that we can have additional staffing in elective home education to meet some of our statutory duties. So we're in the process of recruitment as well. And that's to manage the risk and manage the welfare and well-being, as well as the educational aspect as well. We are concerned obviously that some of our families have cited, not concerned that they've cited COVID as the reason not to send their children, but obviously we're concerned once we come out of the pandemic, schools start going back, we've got the vaccine rollout, that then we may have a number of families wanting to re-enter their children into school, and we want that to be as seamless as we can possibly make it. But we understand that some of the families won't be able to have their children back in the schools that they've come out of. We do have a local agreement that if it's within 3 months they can return to their former school, but obviously if it's extended beyond those 3 months and their school is a very popular school and therefore that it would be oversubscribed, we've got to make sure we've got that information and knowledge and that we can mitigate some of the risks. That's kind of, because I think I've included everything else in the report. I can go through the report if you want me to, but otherwise that was my kind of spiel, and I'm happy for questions.
Okay. Andrew, does you want to add anything to what's just been said?
Nothing particularly to add, except that we have focused resource in this area, because clearly it's been a concern where we've got a high number. Rose, I think it's now up to about 650 in terms of the number of who are electively home educated, and we've had the single biggest rise this year that we've ever had. And the committee we're aware from previous times when we've been here that the numbers have gone up in the last 5 or 6 years already. So this is the single largest rise. And we are concerned both in terms of actually making sure that we are in contact with them now, but also, as Rose has highlighted, this concern about getting children back into school as and when parents have confidence to actually bring them back onto roll, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, well, we'll take the questions, and the first one is Councillor Joe Orton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rosemary, for your report. How's it going to work, can I ask, if a home educated child is intending to sit a GCSE or A-level exam this year, when the grades are going to be awarded by central assessment? How is that going to work for that child?
Obviously, you'll be aware that when families take their children out of education, or out of school, sorry, not out of education, out of school, we're not then responsible for facilitating their access to exams. It's a very good question To which, other than that, I don't really have an answer. I don't know if Andrew would like to come in and has got any greater insight into that.
Well, in fairness, it's not possible. And so parts of the process that Rose include in the report include that when a family nominates to become electively home educator for their children, that officers do contact them, talk through the implications of that, the practical implications for them as part of that. It's one of the reasons why we have the 12-week moratorium in terms of being able to return to their school. But in reality, Councillor Otton, once a family removes their child and there aren't any exams in train, there isn't any means or mechanism for that child to be awarded a grade this year.
Yeah, this is what I feared. I mean, in normal years, you could sit as an external candidate at an exam centre, but clearly an exam centre taking an external candidate doesn't have the means to do a centre assessment for that candidate because not the centre that is doing the education. So, I mean, so yes, you would go through routinely and talk to parents about what the implications are, but in any other year, except perhaps last year, the implication was you could still sit an exam as an external candidate. Are children and parents aware that this year they simply cannot be awarded grades for anything? And given that the announcement was only a couple of days ago that all the grades would be centre assessed, you know, what belief did we leave them with until a couple of days ago? What belief did we leave them with in the autumn? And is there still time for them to go back into school and be awarded centre assessed grades if they want to get grades at all?
Can I sorry, Andrew, you make your contribution and then Jackie is going to come in and add something to it. But it does, on the face of it, seem to be a hole.
It's just that this morning, the Secretary of State was on the news saying that it was going to be teacher assessments for all GCSEs and A-levels this year. Now, that doesn't address the children who are home educated and how they're going to get at their assessment centre. But I suppose the question is, those children that were normally at school, all depending when they stopped doing their schoolwork remotely and became elected to be home educated. Do you see what I mean? Whether they could be, that's a question, I suppose. But I just think it's not going to be assessed centrally from today. They've said it's going to be teacher assessment.
I'll certainly take it up with the DfE because Councillor Otton's right. It's a very clear and apparent gap. Councillor Drayton is right. Depends how long the child has not been educated in a school. So, for example, if a child's never been educated in a school, then even if they were admitted tomorrow, a school is not going to know a great deal around in terms of that. What part of what the Secretary of State announced as well is the provision of some non-compulsory external tests. So it could be that actually that we make those available to people. But I will have to go back to the DfE because I suspect that even if they were to take those tests, it still doesn't actually mean they're going to be awarded something that is formally a qualification. Certainly last year, it also applied last year, because the exams were cancelled last year. So although we didn't know it in September when the initial increase started to become apparent, I think we were talking to families then around the difficulties in terms of examinations if their children weren't in school on roll. But I'll take it up with the DfE chair and I can report back through correspondence back to the committee.
Okay, it's not that I don't think the DfE will listen to us. I was just wondering if it would help if you had a number of colleagues backing you with the same problem, because it's not just confined to Sheffield and it's well spotted by Joe. I think maybe if you could get other people to take up the issue as well, they might possibly listen. Not that they won't listen to yourself, Andrew, but I just think, you know, the more people that raise it, possibly the more likely we are to get a sensible answer back.
We certainly work through our regional networks and contacts to do that, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Joe. Have you finished, Joe?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. I've got a number of people. I think the next one is Jim Steinke.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 3 questions. 2 of them are related. The first is, thanks for your presentation, Rosemary. You referred to Sheffield developing its own kind of module a few years ago and diverging slightly from the national model that was being had been used prior to that. I'm still unclear, and this is maybe a historical question, but I think it's helpful in the current context, is were there significant changes at this point that Sheffield is doing any different from, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I'm trying to get a sense of where we may be going in terms of a consistency of approach here. The second, if I could just do three questions together, Mick. The second is about the fact that we know that a number of people have been in lockdown over this year and in isolation, maybe finding it difficult to kind of go back into actually leaving the house, etc., and engaging with wider society more. Are there any concerns at this point about where parents who have been home educating or distance online learning with their kids, who almost can't make that step, that they've become almost so locked in the home that that's one of the reasons why they're concerned? It's not so much about concerns of school safety, but it's like almost getting past the front door. And I suppose I would say anecdotally, I've come across couple of parents who I think have got concerns of that. The third question related to that, I raised earlier in the year a particular concern I've got about QAnon and I suppose related conspiracy theories of parents who weren't sending their kids to school because of that. You followed that up at the time, and I appreciate that, Andrew, and that was very helpful, and I never came up with a negative response, which was good. But are there any concerns around about parents who are not sending their kids to school because of conspiracy theories, and that how would that be picked up? How would that then be reacted to? Because again, I have got some concerns potentially for that, although I haven't specifically identified any at this point. Thanks.
Could one of you educate, particularly me or anybody else, what that particular issue is, Jim? I've got a very vague knowledge of it, and I'm just wondering if somebody could sort of précis what that particular problem is, not only for the committee's benefit, but for anyone who might be listening and think, what on earth was that?
That's a fair point, Nick. I'll just rephrase that and allow officers to come back, because they were very helpful. It's really about, it's more a phenomenon in America where a number of parents would not be sending their children to school, home educating, because teachers and schools are part of a global conspiracy, whatever the conspiracy is about. But I think there are a number of conspiracies, trends around at the moment, and it's the impact that may have on parents not letting their kids go to school because they'll become indoctrinated by, and is the most public one at the moment because of Trump and other states, but I think there are others around, and it's how do we kind of, I suppose part of my question is, I don't know how big an issue it is, but if it is an issue, then it's how is it actually would it be addressed?
Thank you, Jim.
Okay,
right then. If I just deal with that question first, then, Chair, which is, at the time that Councillor Steinke raised it with us, we made a concerted effort to just check and double check the reasons that have been given for parents opting to electively home educate their children. And we also, as well as looking at the reasons, we also, as it were, put our ear to the ground in terms of anything that we were picking up, particularly in relation to the QAnon conspiracy. And we weren't able to make or find any direct connection to that, which is what Councillor Steinke is referring to. The trouble is, if you're engaged in a conspiracy, you're not likely to say, I'm keeping my child at home because of the conspiracy. So in other words, it's possibly even more more deep-seated than that. So the point is that we, having been raised, we're now very acutely aware of that. We certainly look for signs of any odd rationale in terms of keeping children at home, whether it's related to any particular types of conspiracy or not. And we're still not aware at the moment of that, but that doesn't mean it's not occurring. It doesn't mean it's not right for us to keep on looking for it as well.
So if it wasn't on the radar before, Jim has certainly put it on your radar.
Well, certainly the process that was, certainly the process that was in place before was always about checking the rationale for parents choosing for their children to be elected home educated. But certainly, yes, after Councillor Stankey's raised with it, we're very cognizant of that.
Thank you.
Okay, shall we go from the top then? Just going back to the first question in terms of so I think what you asked, if I've heard right and correct me if I'm wrong, is we introduced the policy, but we'd previously been reliant on the national guidance, and then it was the difference between the two in the direction that we were heading in. Have I understood that? Yeah. So just to say, when we were following or attempting to follow DfE national guidance, what that didn't then allow us to do was to personalise it to the agencies and the services that are in Sheffield, and therefore it wasn't clear on who was doing which part in order to adhere to our statutory duties. So with having a policy that is clear for Sheffield City Council and what we do, and that is on our website and available to parents, so we're being very clear and very transparent, it sets out who is responsible, who we're going to be communicating with, and who is going to be in contact with you as a family member or as a child, what your school, that if you're coming off a school role, what they're responsible for undertaking, and what you as a parent is responsible for undertaking. So the policy is following the national guidance, so we're not deviating from national guidance, but it's also demonstrating very clearly who and how we are addressing each of our statutory duties and by which department. And that obviously helps with things like information sharing, data protection, GDPR, because we're being very clear and transparent. So it's not deviating from what we should be doing, it's making it clear on how we're doing what we should be doing. Is that okay?
Councillor Drayton has said that she would like to add something to
just
this.
to add something, because it was in my portfolio at that point in time. There was if you'll remember, councillors may remember, there was the sad death of a child who was in being home educated, and it was clear that, you know, we felt we needed to have more eyes on, I think, the children in our home. We did a big piece of work on it, and as Rosemary said at the beginning, there was not a policy. It never became a policy in Sheffield, but I went to a meeting in a regional meeting where certainly Wakefield, they were very concerned about some schools and head teachers. If a child was not, you know, wasn't behaving or whatever, they'd convince the parent that they perhaps should home educate, and all the parent said to the parent, all you have to do is write a letter in and saying you're home educated, and taking them off roll, so getting the children's off roll that way. And there were those particular issues going around, not that were happening Sheffield, but we wanted to tighten up a little bit more. We felt there must be leeway in the national guidance, so that was why there was a big piece of work done on it. And as Rosemary said, it was to keep all the stuff that was there, but add some more stuff on, which we felt made us feel more secure in Sheffield, especially around safeguarding and things like that. I hope that's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Jim, do you think you've had your questions answered?
If I just go back to the second one, Mick, about the, is there any indications of people who are parents finding it almost difficult to leave, having been locked down 3 times or been in isolation for maybe a large part of the year? Part of that problem of going past the front door into the wider world is about sending kids back to school.
So I come into that one.
That's different from conspiracy, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure that it's really difficult, because communication with our home educating families, we want open lines of communication. We definitely want them to feel like we're here to support, and they can access any services as any child or family could, as is appropriate to their needs. However, we know, like I've said, the usual routes into those services sometimes aren't as readily available, because sometimes it goes through schools, and obviously that isn't a mechanism for home educating families. So excuse me, one of the things that we are trying to do is ensure that we attempt communication with all families that we know are home educated, not just those that have come in new because of the pandemic or through the lockdown, but all of our families that we know of. So all 600, and I think it's 52 families that we know to be home educating their children, we are attempting to have contact, to have those conversations about, is there any support that we need to be offering you? Are there any difficulties that you found, not just throughout the lockdown, but in general, and not just linked to your child's education, but it could be more about emotional, social well-being. So we are, and this is why another reason why we've had the additional staffing to be that have been agreed as well through our portfolio leads and elected members, because we see that we need to be doing that so much more. And obviously there's so many more children in this arena now.
Jackie, you wanted to add something?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think it's a really important point that Councillor Steinke's made, because, and it's not just about the home educating children, those that left school and said we're going to home educate in over the last year. We know, don't we, that emotional and mental health has been a big issue for not only children and young people being at home and you know, but actually now might be going back to school, you know, because they've been used to being taught at home in the way, or getting taught at home from school, not necessarily home educated. So I'm sure the Future in Mind project and the schools that have got that set up, that network set up, will be looking into that. And I'm sure Andrew and the others working in that area, and I know working across, we realise that children and young people, and this committee have always highlighted that those issues are going to the fore now, and one of those might be going back to school. So I'm sure it'll be looked at in general, not just in the home educated. Thank you.
Thank you. Cliff.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you kind of touched on this already, but is there some kind of breakdown of the reasons for home education, and how has that changed in the last year or so? I mean, my assumption would be that it's due to clinically vulnerable children or families having to isolate, but I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. Can you tell us some of the reasons and what the proportions are, if possible? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so we do keep track. Obviously, this is all relying upon what parents want to tell us and want us to know. So we do have an option for parent chose not to tell us their reasons to home educate, which is their right to do, to not inform us why. We know that before any of the pandemic, before any of the lockdown happened, we knew our two top reasons for children coming out of school to be home educated with. One was anxiety linked to attending school, or their anxiety in general, which affected their attendance at school, and special educational needs. They were the top two pre-lockdown or the pandemic. Since the pandemic, we've seen a shift in that. And it's actually the worries about COVID are first and foremost. So that is most definitely our top. I don't have exact numbers for you. We can get that if you'd want exact numbers, but COVID is cited as the top. We then have anxiety as the second one. And then SEN has actually dipped and is now our lowest reason for children coming out. And we still have a high proportion of parents who choose not to inform us as to why they're taking the decision. Is that okay?
Hey.
Is that right?
Okay, yeah. I don't need the exact numbers, but yeah, it'd be really interesting to know why they don't want to tell us, though, wouldn't it? But we're not going to get that, are we?
Okay, Cliff.
Thank you.
Right now, Anne, there was a big yellow hand on your screen earlier, but it's not there now. Do you want? Is it because you haven't got chat that you put that up when you want?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to put it in chat, I'm afraid. So I did put it up. Have I lowered it? It should be still there. I've got it on my screen.
Anyway, it's your turn. If you
Thank you.
That's all right.
Yeah, thanks, Rosemary, for your presentation. I'm sure I'm not alone as a local councillor in having grave concerns about the rising incidents around domestic abuse. And I know you've mentioned something about, you know, our safeguarding policies and getting some more staff to work on the issues that we know are out there for families, but particularly with home educated children. I'm wondering, could you kind of give us a bit more of a picture exactly how you identify some of the families and children that domestic violence might be happening in their homes, and also how we follow up with that and the work that we are going to do in the future with those children who may be victims along with their mums or dads of domestic violence and the growing incidents that are around at the moment. And my second question is about children whose parents have elected to do homeschooling, now wanting to go back into mainstream school. Our children who have got SEN or disabilities that parents still choose to for their children to go into our mainstream schools. What are the likelihood of them being able to go back to the schools that they were initially in? Because I think it's quite important for them as well with their mental health and the friendships that they've already created in their schools, that they do get a priority in that situation, albeit difficult. Have we done some working out of those particular children and doing some communication with their skills to enable that to enable that to happen? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, excuse me. So yes, thank you. You're right. We do have obviously concerns about the rising number of domestic abuse, and undoubtedly that will affect some of our home educating children and families, because we know as a percentage it's likely to. So in terms of how we identify safeguarding, so we have we have our ongoing contacts with families that we try and attempt. What we do also is we have a risk. We identify the level of risk associated with families, not because they're home educating, but because of the circumstances in which they came out of school, and then anything else that we understand around that family in terms of previous service access or previous historical issues or challenges that they faced. So what we then do is say, well, actually, because of the difficulties or challenges that family have faced, let's up our contact with that family and make sure that they are feeling supported, like we're here for them, and that they've got a route to access services, so they know who we are, they've got that named contact. If then we get informed of concerns by, say, a member of the public, which we do, and we've had quite a number recently, we also have links through, and Helen's here today, so Helen Sweeton, my colleague in Children and Families, is here today. We have links through to the Safeguarding Hub where we can identify those issues, and then we can collate that. We can collaboratively decide what our response needs to be to that family in order to support the issues that are arising. It is difficult because we don't have a duty to be going out, say, like every week. But what we do is try and make sure families know who to contact and when to contact and how, if issues do arise, which I know can be tricky, particularly in circumstances where domestic abuse is prevalent within the home. We have got a number of people who work with families who have survived domestic abuse. We've got commissioned services and the delivery within our local authority. So we have, the parenting team do work not only with the mums or the females in the family or the victims that have suffered the domestic abuse, but there's also for perpetrators as well. There's also a programme there as well, because otherwise we're just perpetuating the cycle of there may be another victim or another survivor into the future. And we also have a commission with Haven who work with children and parents in order to help them recover from any domestic abuse that may have happened. So when we do know about it, there are a number of services out there who can support. And then we do also have, our MAST offer, our social care offer, there's our inclusion offer. So there are a multitude of services available to support should issues be identified, but we do have good links across our early help and into social care as and when is needed. Is that okay for question 1?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Rosemary.
Thank you. And then in terms of the children, if I move on to question 2, in terms of children who want to re-enter, specifically thinking about our children with special educational needs, we've talked about the fact that we've got the 3 months agreement, that if it's within 3 months, then we do, if parents want their child to re-enter the school in which they came out of, then that is a local agreement that they can. So there is that. We do know our children who have special educational needs who are currently being home educated, both those with education health care plans and those that are SEN support as well. And we do talk to them about their choices about education. If they're a child who's got an education health and care plan, then they still have their annual review facilitated by the local authority. So we know when they're looking, when they would be looking to re-enter education. We also have our inclusion and attendance team who work with families who tell us that they would like their child to re-enter education, and we look at what that transition needs to look like so it's supported. If we end up in a situation where our families are telling us that whether they've got special educational needs or not, they want to go back into the school they came out of, and it extends beyond that 3 months, where we can re-enter them into their former school, of course we will. But if it's not possible, then we have to look at the support that needs to be built around that family to ensure that they can go into another school. If they've got an education health and care plan, obviously that will be named through the plan for the school that can best meet their child's needs. But yeah, I think the ongoing communication, the fact that we're trying to gain more communication, that trust and open conversation with home educating families, I'm hoping that some of these issues will be brought to our attention before it's like immediate and imminent that we need to find the place. Is that okay? Does that answer your question?
Can I just qualify or confirm one aspect of that? Are we very clear with those families that there is just a 3-month period, and then we contact them before that period is up to have those conversations that, you know, it is a possibility that if you're not ready to re-enter schools, that you may lose that place? Because I know certainly in my ward that our school places are, you know, always oversubscribed anyway. So any child being home educated, then wanting to come back in to that school and they're late to apply again, it could pose quite a lot of difficulties for families and the children. So are we very proactive about ensuring that parents are getting that support and information early on?
I would say we do. So in the beginning of when children are coming out of school, we have so if they're coming out of school, so if they've been in a school and they're coming out, not the parents who choose to home educate right from the child, you know, beginning statutory school age, we have meetings with the parent and the child in the school if we can, and if they want to participate in that, and we are very, very clear at that point. This is the responsibility. This is what's going to happen. These are the local agreements we've got in place. Again, when our children missing education team pick up that deregistration from school, they then ring the parent and they have that conversation. Do you understand what the responsibility is here? Again, we articulate our 3-month agreement, and then then it goes over to our multi-agency support team, so our MAST service, who again go out, they facilitate a visit, or if it needs to be a virtual visit, they do that. And again, they talk about, was this your choice? Do you understand what you've taken on? And then it goes over to our elective home education advisory teacher, who then picks up the education aspect. So there are multiple times within that where we tell our families who are choosing to home educate children of both the national guidance, our local agreements, and so they understand the timescales that we are working to. And our letters that go out from our advisory teacher also restate that as well. But I don't think we are just picking up on one of your points about the end of that 3 months. I think that's an area that perhaps we could look at to say, you know, you are coming now to the end of your 3-month period. Are you confident in your choice? Are you happy to continue to home educate because your right to your school place is going to end? So I think that is a very good point to raise, and I think that's something we can definitely pick up. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose.
Could I
also, Chair, just in relation to another point that Councillor Murphy made, which is that admissions, both new to school and in year, as well as a highly regulated area of work within the Education Authority. And explicitly coming back out of elective home education is not part of the legislative criteria or framework or priority for that. So I have raised this with the DfE in relation to asking them to consider whether they need to amend legislatively the mechanisms around admissions to take into account that this year, next year, there will be large numbers of children coming back from elective home education.
Could I just interrupt for a minute? What and maybe I've missed it during the presentation. I'm sorry if I have. Well, I read through the paperwork, and you went through each sort of obligation of the service one by one, and with proof that you actually comply with those, which was really helpful. What I don't get a sense of is the scale of the problem in terms of children not getting a satisfactory education, whilst at the same time potentially being at risk as well. I can't pull out of that what you're telling me. What sort of, to quantify, if you like, the level of the problems. And there are two problems, aren't there? Poor education and then the safety aspect. And the other is the relationship you have with the safeguarding board. We had a presentation from them the last time we met, and I don't remember, and it may be because simply the size of the issue that they have to cover is so large. But I don't remember them mentioning home education as part of their remit, and I think maybe it ought to be in their annual report if it isn't.
In relation to Safeguarding Board, I'm a member of that, and I've been reporting into the Safeguarding Board at regular intervals while I've been in post around elective home education. I don't know if you're going to do it, Chair, or I can certainly pick up with the Chair in terms of whether their remit needs to be amended or needs to be made more explicit around it.
I think it would be helpful. I don't mind if we send a joint letter. If you agree that what I've just said is a valid point, then yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. In relation to numbers, Rose, do you want to see if there's any quantification around where those two things intersect, Rose?
Yeah. So, so at the moment, so what we've got with our children who are entering home education now, we have a very large proportion of families that are sending back very appropriate approaches to education for those new into home education children. So that's a real positive. When we've emailed, so it's only recently, as the guide, I say recently, it was in April 2019 when the DfE guidance changed, that allowed us to go out year on year to ask our families for updated curriculums because of the change of year group and because of the change in age of the children. Before, that wasn't part of the guidance, therefore wasn't part of our ongoing practice. So since that's come in, we've approached all of our home educating families to say, can we have your updated curriculum because your child's now entered another year? What we see is we don't see many families returning those curriculums. So it's very high when they're coming in new and we're pursuing that approach to home education. But as families get into the flow of it, they're not used to routinely submitting their new education plans to us. And that is something, again, that we need to pursue. Because we need that confidence that our children are having the education that's full-time, efficient, sufficient, in line with age, aptitude and ability. So we do need to pursue those families. What we do is we do have a very clear escalation process as well, which we can't follow at this point in time because we can't access our courts for school attendance orders or education supervision orders. But once we do have that option, we have a rigour applied to asking for the curriculums, and we ask 3 times. If we don't receive anything back, then the document tells us that that enables us to escalate through to school attendance order. And if they provide the evidence and the court deems it suitable and efficient and sufficient, then obviously that ceases to go any further. But if not, then we issue the school attendance order. We're working currently, we've never really done education supervision orders in Sheffield, but again, we are working with our colleagues in children and families in order to make education supervision orders part of what is available to us should we be highly concerned about children, you know, in terms of educational neglect. So I can't give you, the numbers are hard to extract at the moment because we've only just started to rigorously pursue our families to have that ongoing year-on-year education plan. So it is something that we are aware that we really need to strengthen, and we will be strengthening it, and we will be using our escalation process as needed. But first and foremost, we would look to be supporting families to make education right for the children before pursuing a more punitive approach.
Okay, at least it's on your radar, which is good. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Colin, and then Francine after Colin.
Thank you, Chair. I was picking up some of the points, really. It's all about capacity issues, really, with the spike that we've had in home education, you know, due to the COVID. I'm looking at a couple of points, but section 210 on page 34 going on to page 35. I think the second bullet point, there's some words missing there. It starts up, we having routinely used education supervision orders. That doesn't really make sense. So can you clarify what that means? But I am concerned about the capacity of staff to pursue all the things that you've been actually just referring to in response to the last couple of questions, that where clearly the home education isn't satisfactory at all, and it arguably isn't going on at all, where we can actually pick this up, you know, because there's more people in the system. And have we got enough staff capacity to do this? And to, you know, if we're having an annual visit with, is it 652 young people who are home educated now, that's an awful lot of staff time that's involved in that, and picking up the nuances of where it might appear superficially to be okay, but actually isn't very good underneath. You know, have we got the capacities to do that? And also following on Councillor Murphy's points about keeping school places open, and I know it's not possible sort of legally. I've got a nasty feeling that come September we might have quite a lot of disappointed parents who can't get their children back into their local schools that they've taken them out of. And are you working with the admissions team to see where vacancies might be, you know, where these children can go back to? I know you've answered already that you want to alert parents to the possibility that they won't be able to go back to the local school, but still we'll have the situation where there'll be a number of disappointed young people who can't go back into their local school because the places have gone.
Yeah.
So it's all about capacity, really, I think.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the, you know, identifying suitability of education and having the staff to do the annual visits and the updates, I mentioned earlier that we've had agreement, and we are currently we're out for recruitment now to have. So we've been agreed to have 3 new members of staff. So before we've had the advisory teacher in support of our multi-agency support colleagues in children and families, but now we're going to have more of a team. We're going to have more of a team that are going to support around home education, and therefore we'll build that specialism in order to be able to identify when education is appropriate and sufficient and efficient. So we've got that approach, and so therefore we will have the capacity to identify when education isn't being provided. The other thing I will say is through the escalation process that I've talked about, we've always been we haven't usually gone very far with our school attendance orders, and the reason for that has always been, well, because of some of the legal frameworks about is it within the public interest and things like that, but also because at the point that we get to go into court, a lot of families then produce a lot of evidence to say this is the education I've been providing for my child, but we haven't seen that prior to that point in time. So what the new guidance around from DFE is also telling us is that at that point, if we can evidence that we've pursued families for evidence of education prior to us getting to that point, and then they submit a lot of evidence to court that we haven't been privy to, we can then recoup our costs. And I'm sounding, it's not about the money, but if we can then recoup costs from families for legal fees because they should have produced it earlier on, I think that will mean that we are getting the information about education sooner from our families, because they will understand that that court process could actually elicit a financial penalty to them should they not provide that evidence of education. But we would, I say all that, and that's very, it jars with me a little bit talking about court and money when we're talking about children and education and safety. But obviously, if sometimes that's what we need to have in order to elicit the information that we need. Sorry, I don't know if I think I might have gone off at a tangent, and I apologise if I've not answered your question.
It's all right.
In relation to the
first or last.
Just in relation to the alignment of services, Rosa's team Access and Inclusion is a newly formed service that we've created, and it includes not just elective home education. Includes children missing from education. We've got all of those services together under Rose, so the links are very strong between admissions and elective home education. And just picking up on a comment in the chat from Councillor Teal, it's not just that funding to families disappears when a child becomes electively home educated, but actually funding to the council as well. So we're funded in terms of our central services grant, which is principally an amount of money per child who's on roll in a Sheffield school. And as soon as the children become electively home educated, actually the council's funding reduces as well. So there's a double whammy there in terms of funding to the schools is lost, funding to the families is lost, funding to the council is lost as well. So I've also made that point to the DFE as well, Chair.
Thank you. I've got.
Hang on. The second bullet point on 2.10. What should it say?
Haven't. It shouldn't be having, it should be haven't. So we haven't routinely, I think it says we haven't routinely looked at education supervision. We haven't routinely, that's what I've just said about, that is something that we're working across children and families in order to put in place. Apologies.
Okay, Colin. I've got Sam, Mike Levery, Mike Chaplin, Kevin Oxley and Gary Weatherall on a list. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Francine is next. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Otherwise, I'm going to draw the line under that because we have got other stuff to do. Okay, Francine.
Thanks for your presentation. I noticed that a lot of the language used around homeschooling is negative, like it's concerning, it's a problem, etc. And I completely understand that a lot of the reasons for families homeschooling can be negative, such as, recently COVID, a lack of SEND support, off-rolling, that has been a huge problem. I completely understand that, and I don't want to detract from that at all. But I think it's also really important that we recognise for some families it is a positive choice, and it can be a positive experience. And I just wanted to ask basically, how are you going to ensure that an approach is developed that isn't overly value laden? Because I do worry that it could be off-putting to families who are homeschooling if they feel like the council is seen to have an essentially negative view of homeschooling. And I suppose I'm asking how families will be positively supported without judgment. And my second question kind of related to that is that, I know there are lots of parent-led networks amongst homeschooling families in Sheffield. I just want to know, does the council have any links with these networks? And, are they able to support families to access them who might not know about them? And things like that, sort of just developing a more positive relationship with the homeschooling community in Sheffield. And I know you mentioned, you know, sort of there, I wasn't aware of the sort of the court cases and that side of it, but, you know, that could be a sort of preventative measure in terms of that, you know, families not submitting things, you know, could some of that be to do with perceptions and things like that, if families aren't volunteering to share information about the homeschooling that they clearly are doing, and ends up being presented in court and things like that. Yeah, so I'm just wanting to know sort of how positive relationships are going to be developed there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I would absolutely agree with what you've said in terms of how we view home education, because it can be a really positive choice for both the child and parents who make that choice. So one of the things that we have looked at are things like, so before, I'm quite recently managing home education. So prior to my involvement in this, it was very letter based. So our communication with families, it was very based upon, I'm going to write to you, you're going to write to me. And as we all know, just as human beings, regardless of the roles that we have to undertake, we need that human contact. We need to be able to talk to one another, to create those relationships. So yes, we need our letters, yes, we need our processes, but let's also bring this down to a human level. And one of the things I've talked to the advisory teacher around, and then any new staff that have come into support, is that we want to be able to support our parents, we want to be able to support our children, because this is their choice of how they're choosing to educate their children. And if that is their choice, then we don't want to be saying you shouldn't be making that choice. We don't want to be saying it's not good enough. We want to be ensuring that where it is good, we're saying that's really good, that's really positive. And when we've got concerns, again, we say that's not good enough, and actually we've got concerns. So we want that. It's about that high support and high challenge that we want in place, but at a very human level and at an interactive level, because it doesn't need to be I'm a home educating parent and we are the local authority. It should be we've got children that are being home educated, and we all collectively want to make sure that that education is the best it can be for that child. So yes, I don't believe anybody, well, I would hope that nobody in the local authorities got a negative view of home education. I think there are concerns that probably heightened in relation to it, given some of the serious case reviews that have been out nationally. However, that can't then, you know, blind us to actually it being a positive choice in some instances, or in the majority of instances. In terms of the networks that you've mentioned, we are linked into a lot of the networks, where they are official and verified. We actually signpost our home educating families to engage within those networks. So it goes out as some of the literature that we send to home educating families. Is that okay?
Thanks. That's great. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, Francine. Sam?
Sure. It sounds like you've been doing a lot of good work in the face of rising demand and a challenging context. So thank you. I guess just picking up on some of Mick Rooney's earlier questions, because he shot some of my foxes. The report was quite...
I don't shoot foxes. It's illegal.
Of course, I apologise. The report was quite qualitative, so I just kind of wanted to ask some questions to try and get some scope. So I guess the first one was, do you foresee the numbers continue? How do you foresee the numbers of kind of people being home educated going forward? Do you think it will go up or down? What do you think will happen with that? The next one was around 2.9, which discusses sufficiency, and I'm just going to call it good enough education. We used to have a number where you could give a percentage on roughly how many of the children were having good enough education. That used to be in reports a few years ago. For I guess, could you give a view on what kind of percentage are having good enough home education? Do we have some breakdowns on roughly what age the children are who are being home educated and when they're entering home education? And then how stable is the cohort? How long are students receiving education that's not good enough? Because obviously if it's just for if it's quite a mobile cohort, then that's maybe less problematic than if it's a stable cohort in regards to the sufficiency of education. And I guess the other question is, if you're not tracking these, are these something that you're intending to track, these kind of numbers, that give us a scope on that in the future? Could you give a view on any of those kind of, from your own experience, if you can't give us numbers?
No, I don't think I've got my. Are you sure? Because I'm in the middle of the work.
And Councillor Rooney's forgot to mute. So if I've heard right, so it's a bit difficult to either. So I'm hoping that I've got the questions right. So it was about the numbers and what we think are going to happen to the numbers going forward.
Yeah,
That
so
was
numbers and what you think will happen to them going forward.
Yeah.
How
So,
stable is the cohort?
Yeah, sorry. So in terms of, we obviously saw a significant rise from September 2020, I'll just get my years right, from September 2020, we saw the significant rise, and we were having between 20 to 30 deregistrations from school coming in on a daily basis through September. It eased off in October, again it went down in November and through December as well. We've now, from this year, from 2021, we have seen it stabilise, so we're only getting between 1 to 2 a week, and some weeks it will be none. So we've seen it really stabilise. I mean, I know it's only been 2 months, but we have had a stability from the beginning of this year that numbers haven't, they haven't gone above 5 per week. So that's obviously steadied, and we would expect to see that. In terms of when we usually see peaks, it's usually after the holidays. So after the summer, after Christmas, after Easter is when we usually see our rise. In terms of what we expect going forward, I suppose putting together what we have seen happen and what we know the reasons from parents have been, as the vaccine programme is rolling out and people become more confident in the in the vaccination and the protection that provides, then I would expect that the numbers of children coming out will continue to fall. But that is my assumption. And obviously I'm just basing it on what we've seen so far. With the opening announced of the 8th of March, obviously, if we didn't have the vaccine rollout, we would be expecting to see another rise, because that's what happened last time that schools were announced to be going back. But I'm hoping that because of the vaccine and because of the measures that have been in place, families will feel assured and more confident in sending children back to school. But that's not a guarantee, because we're in a different situation, so it's really hard to predict. But I think what I would say, in order to offer some reassurance, is that we feel that we are prepared either way, because we know that this could go either way. So we're kind of prepared for both. In terms of the ages of the children, we know that as children go through transitions, that's when we see more children come out of school, and that's going back for the last 8 years. We've tracked the information. So as children are coming into statutory school, we usually see them coming out in years 1 or 2, and then as children transition from 6 to 7, so years 6 to 7, we will see a rise there. And again, around GCSE kind of time, so year 9, year 10, again, you see a slight rise there. But other than that, it's fairly standard across age ranges, but just those key transition years. You asked, sorry, I think you asked another question about the quality of education, was it? And how we...
Yeah, so I said, roughly, do you have a view on what percentage of the children are receiving good enough education?
I think that links also to Councillor Rooney's question, doesn't it, about do we know the numbers of children who aren't in receipt of a good enough education? And it's like I said, because we haven't always routinely, because it wasn't our duty to, routinely checked in with families who have always been home educated, that's a really difficult question to answer as we stand right now. But obviously with the changing guidance and with our duty to check in every year and escalate where we're not seeing appropriate and efficient and sufficient education being provided, we will in time have that information readily available to us, and we will be able to proportion it and age it and give you cohorts of children that we may have more concerns about.
Partly I asked because we used to have that data, so the committee used to be given that number. So prior to 2019, the change, we did get that number. The other question, I suppose, when we get that piece of data is how long are the children receiving education that isn't good enough? Are we actually able to turn those outcomes around? And I suppose the other question is how stable is the cohort? So how long is a child choosing to be electively home educated? Are people coming in and then coming back out 6 months later? Or are they, once they're into elective home education and go past that 3-month period, are they continuing to be electively home educated for the rest of their school career?
So what we see is when we get the children coming out, what we usually find is within a term, so when they've come out at the beginning of a term, there's usually, by the end of that term, there's usually a third of the children gone back to school. So that's a very broad average that I would take there. I forgot again your question because I get pinned on one and then I can't think of the others. I didn't write them down. Sorry. So yeah, was your third go back? What was the other one? Sorry.
You have been answering questions for a very long time. It's a reasonable thing that your mind is starting to go a little bit numb.
I'm trying to keep up. Sorry.
The other question that I won't ask you to answer now is once we get to that sufficiency or good enough education number, it'd be useful to know how long, they are in that position of it being not good enough, and whether or not we're able to change that round. Like, is there actually things that we can do to drive that? Because, having worked with young people for a career, many of them, some of that situation you can't do much about, or there's a lot of factors coming into it, the life of any child or young person.
Yeah, so in terms of our policy and our approach, we don't, so in the beginning of home education, we don't say, so there is a myth out there that you can take a time to unschool your children, but actually national guidance tells us, and it's a statutory duty to ensure there isn't a period of deschooling or unschooling. It is actually you come out of your school, if that's what's happening, you come out of your school and then actually it's immediately into home education, and families and parents should have been planning for that before removing their child from a school role. However, you've got to also then be reasonable in that, because everybody's finding their feet. So what we do is we try and give a 6-week window during which we have letters, phone calls, support offers out to families. If they would like to access resources that we have available, we can provide them with them. But 6 weeks is usually our timescale to parents to say within that 6 weeks, really by the end of it, you should be providing to us something that evidences that sufficient and efficient education. If not, then obviously it's whether it's so poor that we feel that actually it's within that child's best interest to re-enter education in a school, or actually there's sufficient progress being made that actually we're going to pursue the support with the family. And our advisory teacher is extremely skilled and extremely knowledgeable around curriculum and education, and is engaged in like national networks and things like that. So she is very able to look at what families are providing, both physically providing within the space and then what is evidenced as in terms of writing, if that's how they choose to articulate to us their education. So I would say 6 weeks is our turnaround, but then obviously if you're thinking about how long does it take for children to catch up if they haven't had that education, we would hope, because we have a 6 weeks window, it wouldn't take too much time for them then to catch up should they need to re-enter education. Have I answered all questions?
Not quite, but I think we've had a long back and forth, and I think we'll leave it there.
If you want to put the remaining issues that you're not quite satisfied of being dealt with in an email, I'm sure you'll get an answer back. Okay. Happy with that? Yeah. Mike L as opposed to Mike C.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report, Rosemary. I'm back on numbers. I think it really helps the committee if they can have a visual picture in terms of simple, high-level data information that they can relate to, understand, and then build their questions on that, because there's loads of questions about information. And I think now we've identified that anxiety and special educational needs have been the two main areas. I think we could add COVID, because it's a peak, it'll go down, but we're not sure by how much and for how long. And finally, as Francine says, positive choices. How many of these are positive choices? And if we could have some information about trends, so we know where we're going and we know where in those 4 areas those trends are moving, that will be really helpful. It doesn't have to be numbers, it can be a percentage, just to give us an overview of it all. And then in particular, in terms of things like anxiety of attendance, what are those things? Is it things like transition from primary to secondary, kids who are worried about moving into a big school from a small school? What are those simple things that cause the anxiety in the children? And also special educational needs, some sort of breakdown there about what element is it that's causing them to homeschool rather than put them into school? So is it things like the school has no Senko and therefore is not addressing the needs, special educational needs very well of the kids that are there? Is it fear of permanent exclusion because there's behavioural problems and they'd rather take them out before they're excluded? You know, those very simple indicative reasons as to why these things are happening. And I think then just finally, some feeling of how many of those home education kids are causing concern, just in a percentage scale. So is it 5, 10% or 20%? So we've got an idea of where it is you're going to have to concentrate your resources and where you're happy with things are going okay. And that'll be really useful for us.
Can I ask, Mike, when do you want that to come back? Do you want, and would you want it as a proper full-scale report on a future agenda, or would you just want it by way of a note for information so that we can take it further or elsewhere if we so choose?
I think at this stage it will be when you come back at a future date, because clearly as we come into the next academic year, we'll want another picture of what's going on, particularly with the COVID issue and what's happening. So if you came back with the data as well, for me, that'd be great.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, that's clear, Mike. Thank you. Mr. Chaplin.
Thank you, Councillor Rooney. I think those were very good questions that have been asked so far. I appreciate it. It's probably getting a bit tiring for Rosemary Ward, but I do appreciate the line of questioning from Councillor Mike Levery just now, because this is a very qualitative report, and getting a sense of scale is very, very difficult. So I have one question at the moment. Well, it'll be my one question for the day on this, and that's the number of children who would have been expecting to sit exams this summer, whether it's GCSEs or A levels. Do we have an idea of how many are now not going to be able to get any assessment for at 16 or 18?
Yeah, so in our elective home education cohort, there are 86 children who are in year 11 as we stand right now. One of the things I will say is I understand the concerns that have been raised about, they can't access that teacher assessment. One of the things that we have done that we haven't done in previous years is we are offering careers advice and guidance to all of our year 11s now. So there's going to be some virtual open forums that they can access, plus then the offer of individual, like I say interviews, but, individual sessions where they can sit with one of our careers advisors and actually have that conversation about what they would like to do post 16. We've also, for the first time, got them access to Sheffield Progress, which is the website that all of our children in schools have access to when they come into year 11. So we've now got those logins for any of our year 11 children that are EHE and or not on school roll for any other reason. So they too can access information, advice and guidance around post 16 provision.
Right, where's he going?
Thank you.
Chair, if I may as well, I think if it's okay, we will provide a data report to the committee now. So we'll pull that together and get it to the committee so you can just actually see some of the quantities around this. And then when we're invited back, we'll put the now data as well as the next time's data as well together. But I think it'd be useful just for the committee to see some of those numbers that they've asked about today.
Okay, I'm gonna give one of my stock answers, which is simply that councillors that aren't on this committee doesn't mean that they're not interested in this. So could you send it to all councillors, please, with a little note saying why they've got this? It's otherwise they'll think, what on earth have they sent me this for? It's just that other people are interested in it, and but there's only so many spaces on this committee. Okay.
Yeah, we'll arrange that. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Oxley.
Thank you, Chair.
How's the traffic control job going?
It's not very busy today, Mick. Which is
Oh,
why I'm
right.
on this meeting this morning.
I see.
I've just had a 747 taken off,
Have you?
but aside from that, it's been really quite quiet.
Okay. All right, go on then.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you for your report and thank you for your time today. I think it certainly gives me a lot of confidence in terms of what you're doing and what the service is doing today. But I suppose a simple question, which aligns in some respects to what Mike and others have said, in terms of how do we measure success? How do we measure how successful our support and service is? That stumped you, hasn't it?
That's like a proper interview question. So, I mean, we have different measures, don't we? So we want to measure the number of children that are receiving an efficient and sufficient education, which is something obviously has been raised quite a number of times today, which we can, come back with the data for. But then also it's the number of children that we have that are known to services, the number of children that then go on to access post-16 provision. And it's like, I think it was Councillor Johnson mentioned about the number of families actually who've taken this as a really positive choice and not because they felt that actually through any reason linked to anxiety, SEN or their children's needs not being met within the education system. So it's when it's that positive choice about actually this is our lifestyle and this is how we choose to educate our children. So I think they're really all the measures that we would want to see in place in terms of children being happy and healthy and all of those things. So some of those are we are much more able to get through data sets and feedback, and some of it is just seeing how the children progress onto and into later life. So I think they would be our measures of success, and then it's just capturing what that looks like in terms of the data sets that we will be providing.
Okay.
Thank you, Rose.
Go back to the day job now. Gary. Gary. You're on mute, mate. Gary. Weatherall.
I think Angela's talking to him.
Gary. Gary, Weatherall, it's you.
Chair, I do apologise. I'm just having a bit of trouble here. I'm going to, Rosemary, you've answered. Well, it's not really clear, but Sam and Chair did ask, when home education, what the results was to the children what's at school. And I think you said you can't supply that. So it's education at school. Is it the same as what education at home's getting? The exam results are the same, or the lower educated at home. Is that clear?
It's clear. I think what's hard to make it hard to answer is that actually nobody's under any duty or responsibility to actually have their children go through examination. So actually, some parents and families might even not only just choose to electively home educate their children, but also then not to enter them into formal examinations. But we can certainly, Councillor Weatherall, we can look at what data we've got and we can add that into this report that we're going to produce. But it is the case that not all families choose to have their children formally tested or examined either.
That can't be right. That don't feel right.
No,
that gives them a complete disadvantage in life.
Absolutely.
Well, it's true, even if it's not right, you're right. So,
what can you do about that?
Sorry, Chair, but that's why many parents, I would say, who homeschool and who make a decision to homeschool not based on pandemics or whether they've got a place in the school they want to do or whatever. A lot of them, and Councillor Johnson's mentioned, there is a homeschooling or elective education movement, and they don't believe their children that school is the best place for their children, like the old sausage machine and going through a sausage and coming out, and they believe that the exams are not fit for purpose, and they don't actually produce rounded children. And their view is, and they're quite right in some cases, for some children that leads to a better outcome for them, you know. And I think that's the difficulty with home and elective education. We're trying to fit a rules based by the government that people have actually opted out for, some people, because they don't believe that's right for them, their families or their children. Whether we believe it's right or not, you know, that's why there's a proportion of families that do it because they believe it's better for their children.
It's a philosophical choice then, in that case.
It is, yeah, definitely.
But how can an employer then, you know, set a child on? We know educational attainment.
I think the simple answer is probably they won't, Gary.
But it's really interesting. Just sorry, I know we don't want this debate to go on.
No, we don't.
Just let me just say one thing. The lot of the business people I've spoken to said that actually for them, what's more important, the most important thing, that what they want to see in a young person isn't necessarily that they've got a qualification over here, a certificate, but they can talk to people, they do their work when they want to, they turn up on time. It's all those skills around somebody being, you know, there wanting to work, eager to learn, can communicate, all those things that they're not actually examined for. But anyway, that's a different debate. Sorry.
Another debate, another time.
Yeah.
Alison Warner, please. You're muted, Alison.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm trying to unmute. Two things, really. One, I have put a note on the chat about the fact that there will be schools with children who are shielding, and there will be some of the same issues about reintroducing them into school after they've ceased to be shielding, that are the same as for Rose's team in terms of reintroducing children to school having been home educated. And so there could be some interplay there on the strategies that are valuable to that process. And the second thing, which was the question, which was, of that 652 children, how many families are we talking about? Because if you've got multiple children in the group in the family who are being home educated, the ability to provide an appropriate education for a variety of different age ranges is very demanding, rather than providing it for just one child. And I just wondered how many families were involved in the numbers who are receiving home education.
It's not too much. We don't have lots of multiple, lots of families with multiple children who are home educating. There are some, but the number's not that. I think, and this is what I think at last count, it was around, so it stands at around 630 families and 652 children, thereabouts.
Right.
Okay. But I will stand corrected as the data comes out.
Yeah. And, you know, and do we know of families that are choosing to home educate just one of their children? And is that the prime reason?
There are some families who choose just to home educate one of their children. I don't have a number of how many families with just who have then multiple other siblings, because that wouldn't be within the home education data set.
No. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and finally, Sophie.
Yeah, Mick, I was mainly asking, is this the right time for my question, which I don't think it is.
Well, we're about to find out. We're about to find out, so.
it was about, I was getting confused earlier when we were talking about home educated children and the impact of COVID and how more people were taking it up. And I think I was mistakenly thinking that all children were now being home educated or being classed as home educated, which now, looking at the figures, I realised that is not the case. So I was going to ask about the gap where kids weren't set up at home to be home educated. So, you know, where they didn't have sufficient internet or laptops. I know in my ward, we've had quite a few emails about this, and we've funded out of the ward pot Wi-Fi extenders for some schools, quite cheap online, recommend to any of the counsellors if you're having the same issues to perhaps think about doing the same. But yeah, I actually don't think that question is relevant to home educating, isn't it? So if not, just scrap it and I'll ask it another time.
I think you're sort of getting the yes, it is for another time look.
Yeah, thank you anyway.
Okay, right. I think that's about it for that. Thank.
No, that's just
It's got something come up on my screen. It's slightly distracting. First of all, can I say thank you to Andrew, and a particular thank you to Rosemary, who must have feel like she's just gone through the Spanish Inquisition. It wasn't meant to be like that. It's just that it's one of those subjects that provokes a lot of interest and a lot of questions. And you did remarkably well to answer most of those without referring to anything that I could see look like notes. So it must be ingrained in your head somewhere. So I'd like to thank you for that. You can leave now if you wish. In terms of what's come out of that, I think myself and John will probably have to have a sit down and work out what the recommendations are from that, because there was a lot of stuff going off. There's one absolute one that Joe brought up, which I think is a really good spot by Joe. And if everybody else is happy, me and John will try and work out some other recommendations from today's meeting. The other was about Mike's. That's the other one in terms of numbers and that sort of stuff, to get a sense of the quantity rather than just the qualitative. But other than that, thank you very much to, I don't know if Andrew's staying, but if you've got the chance to leave, Rosemary, I would if I were you.
And thank you to you all as well for your questions. And it's really good to be able to reflect on the work that we've done, and obviously then the work that we need to continue to pursue as well. So thank you very much.
Indeed.
And yes,
Okay.
I will leave.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, and nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Just get me to meet. I think back to the agenda, which is always a good thing. Oh dear. Bear with me. I think we've done apologies, we've done exclusion of press and public, declaration of interest, so we must be on to minutes of last meeting now, I think.
Chair, can I just make an amendment to apologies? I forgot to say Alan Law.
Yep, he's not
Thank
well,
you.
is he?
He's not, no.
Well. Wish him well for us, Gary. I know you.
Yeah.
You see him well fairly frequently. Minutes, okay. Can we, just to save a little bit of time, can we take them as a whole and agree them as a correct record? People, any objection to that, them being wrong anywhere? No. Okay, thank you. And we'll go through page by page for matters arising. So I'm on, well, I've got page 9. Okay, page 9, 10. I've written something, 4.4. Oh, dear.
If you want, Chair, I can say something here.
No, it's just bear with me. It's my phone is so sensitive. You just touch it and it goes like 20 pages further on. It's just right. Yeah, go on, Alice.
Just to say that those recommendations were circulated to Abdissam and Jackie and Andrew Jones and John McElraith, that the Learn Sheffield have opened a dialogue with Youth Cabinet, and in terms of the consultation, which has just been announced today, the outcome of which is that there will be no exams this year and they will all be teacher assessed. The young people Youth Cabinet put in individual responses, which turned out to be the better way to do it. But I think the really positive thing is that the Learn Sheffield have opened this dialogue that's ongoing now about engaging with Youth Cabinet young people and what their needs are currently.
Yeah, I think it's something that we should be quietly proud about, because it's opened up a proper dialogue with them, which is a proper one, rather than a sort of every now and again we'll say hello sort of relationship. So we should all be quite pleased about that. 5.1, which is on page 10. Why have I written that down?
Because it was a public question and the questioner has received the response back now from, which was approved by the Executive Director people, John McElraith, and by Andrew Jones. So she has now received that and has thanked us for getting that response to her.
Okay. All right. Page 11. Anyone? 12. 13. 14. If I don't see you, shout at me. 15. I've got 7.5 C2, because I don't think Carl has done that from memory. Has she?
No, and part of that was around the capacity on this agenda for everything. This being the last scheduled meeting of this committee, and then a sense that actually the Amber project fits with contextual safeguarding, which might be something equally appropriate for OSMC to look at, because it's more than just children.
So,
but you know, it's there. It's not forgotten. Is it something maybe that members want just an internal briefing on? But we have got to a point in the year where there aren't meetings scheduled, and always something has to slip off the work program.
okay. Well, could you just ask her to send it out, and then we'll see what reaction we get. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. 16. 17. That's it. So we should now be on the mast item. Public questions? No.
No.
None that I'm aware of.
No, none received. No questions or petitions.
Right. So it's mast. Thank you, Helen, for your patience waiting around there.
Not a problem, Chair, not a problem. I don't know whether Councillor Drayton wants to offer some form of introduction, or whether she's happy for me.
No, that's fine. You take it away, Helen, and then I'll chip it in, but try not too much.
Well, given the time, and I'm conscious about keeping people, I'm sure you've got lots of questions, and it does appear from the last agenda item that you've had a fair amount of time to read the paperwork. What would panel prefer? Would you prefer me to go through the paper, or would you prefer to go straight into questions, or for me to make any pertinent points? I'm quite happy to do both.
If you could just summarise the paper. We have had paperwork. I'm assuming most people have read it. In fact, everybody will have read it, won't you? All of you?
Yes.
Yes, definitely. And if you could just go through the highlights of it, and then councillors will come in with questions, okay?
Yes, of course, absolutely. So the paper, I was a little bit uncertain about exactly what information you wanted me to include in the paper. So Councillor Drayton offered some guidance around what might be most helpful, and I've tried to include as much as possible. But as you can imagine, the Mass Service undertakes quite a wide variety of work, and they don't represent all of the early help that's going on in the city. So I've taken some liberties in choosing what to present to you. I've tried to include some information about the really positive work and the emphasis around how we're working well with partners, and the shift that's happened over the last couple of years to make sure that we're providing that whole family approach to as many children and young people as possible. But I've also tried to include some of the challenges that we're currently facing. The increased poverty, the increased complexity that we're seeing in families, some of which we assume is down to some of the disproportionality that we see.
Helen, sorry to interrupt you, but you're a very quiet spoken lady, and also some of us are struggling. We can't hear you very well, is what I'm trying to say, but I'm trying to say a bit more politely than that.
Well,
so if you
I'll move slightly closer to the machine, which means that you get my head much bigger, but does
That's
that
all right.
any better?
No, that's absolutely fine. We need to hear you.
Is that better?
Yes.
So I was summarising. I think I'd gone through some of the strengths and positives. I want to reassure everybody that we've still got a very well respected early help service. There's a great deal of commitment to deliver some really proactive early help. There's been a big focus on identifying need early, so lots of work with our family centres and the link sites out in communities, and certainly lots of work with our education colleagues as well as our health colleagues. However, there have been a number of challenges. So even pre-COVID, we had increased complexity that we were seeing in what was coming through to our early help services. We know that the increased poverty impacts on that, but we also know that things like the disproportionality in Sheffield, where we get children and young people seeing things that they perhaps want that is not available to them, that means that some of their behaviours then escalate. So because of that increased complexity, we've spent quite a lot of resource developing services to try and meet it, and unfortunately one of the negatives to that has meant that those services have developed on their own rather than as a collective. So because we've got increased demand, because we've all developed our services to try and meet that demand, we got some partners, parents, families telling us that actually it wasn't as easy as it had been previously to access early help services. As a result, Councillor Drayton agreed that we could review that. So there's been a multi-agency group pulled together to review our early help services, and we're midway making some really positive progress. And we've also had the COVID impact, which I've tried to include in the paperwork. Is that sufficient for a summary?
I think so. I think it should be. So we need some questions now, members, please. Nobody's on chat. Talk to me.
I noted from the
I'm going to say I find it hard. Colin Ross.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm sure that people will be typing in lots of questions on this. Starting off with, start off with a pedantic point. On 3.9, there's a spelling mistake on page 26, King Egbert School, but I think that's the teacher in me marking the paper or whatever. But actually, paragraph 2.8 on page 23, it's quite worrying, this. It talks about not enough case holding workers to undertake the key worker role for families. Now, clearly, the key worker for families is, no pun intended, the key to all this. I can remember when going back, we found that there was some families had interactions of 23 separate agencies, and which is why we've gone to the key worker. So when I picked up that paragraph 2.8, really, this did alarm me. So can you tell me what we're doing to rectify the situation, and how we're going to make sure that in future there are sufficient case holding workers, so we've got sufficient key workers with these vulnerable young people?
Of course I can, Councillor Ross. So just for clarification, the reason that we're surmising we don't have enough key workers now is not because we've reduced the number, it's because the number that we think we need has increased. So we're still working with the same number of children and families, it's just that we know there are additional children and families that we would like to be able to provide that same level of support to. One of the reasons that that's happened is because we've spent the best part of the last 2 years developing the inclusion strategy and working very closely with schools about identifying those children that we think might need some support at the very earliest opportunity. And those practitioners, those officers, haven't been key working with families, they've been predominantly working with other professionals to make sure that we can upskill them. So we've now got a group of professionals who we want to shift what they're doing so that they do continue to provide some guidance to professionals, but actually the specialist experience and skills that they've developed over the last 2 years can be used to also act as a key worker for some of our most complex families. And that's included within the early help review. Altogether, there are about 470 staff in the early help review, and at the moment there are around 250 of those that do the key working role. And we're hoping with the review that we can increase that by at least another 60 people, which will increase the capacity for children and families to have access to that key worker to try and address that issue.
Colin, you all right with?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
You're okay with that, Anne?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just an issue that's recently been raised with me as the local councillor is the increase in antisocial behaviour by some of the children in the local area, and the residents have been feeding back to the school some of those issues. And from talking and keeping in regular contact with the leaders in our schools in my ward, there are children who are known to our services, and particularly vulnerable children. My concern at the time was whether that was getting filtered back to our mass services and their key workers, and then for me to ask you what actions are being taken to support the families with those types of children who then are potentially also getting into other difficulties, being groomed, etc., by drug dealers and older youths who are also taking part in some of the antisocial behaviour.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Do you mind me asking which particular schools you're referring to?
Yeah, there's King Edward's in my ward, and there's also Lidget, but not so much the young ones from Lidget. It tends to be King Edward's and Tapton.
It's really helpful to know. I'll try and answer your questions as much as I can, but please come back to me if you need anything else. So we work very, very closely with South Yorkshire Police and with the community youth teams. So the community youth teams used to be provided by Sheffield Futures, they're now in-house, and MAST have been very closely involved with the development of the work that they're going to be doing and the youth strategy that they're working on at the moment, so that we can make sure that we're working together to address these particular concerns. We've done quite a lot of work over the last 18 months probably to try and get to grips with what is happening in communities, and it comes through the contextual safeguarding strategy around extra familial harm. So primarily MAST was set up to deal with harm that was within families at the earliest point, and now we know that there is quite a lot of harm for some of our children and young people that's not within their families, and sometimes it's not within their specific community, it's travelling and it comes to them externally. So we've developed the AMBER project as part of the contextual safeguarding strategy, and one part of that is a particular group within MAST. Now, I don't think they've done anything in your particular schools. I know they have done a lot in schools in the north of the city, particularly Chaucer, and I think they have had conversations with Tapton and Newfield, but they've not done anything in that one. So I can make sure that that is the next area that we speak into that school to make sure that we're addressing those issues. The way that they've addressed it is by working with the community youth team, the police and the community safety team in the council to pull together a meeting at the school to talk about the children specifically that they're worried about, but also to be able to feed in with that community knowledge about what else is happening, both from a positive perspective but also from a risk perspective. Where they identify children that might be at risk because of that activity, even if that risk isn't at home, then those follow escalation processes. So we would then be referring into the safeguarding hub. We would be talking to South Yorkshire Police about what they're doing to disrupt those adults that are creating that issue. Again, that's probably more in more detail in the contextual safeguarding strategy than the MAST role, but certainly MAST are one of the partners that are definitely involved in that.
Thank you.
Any specific, we're very conscious though, I suppose this is with my other hat on around that contextual safeguarding, we're really conscious that actually sometimes the officers, the practitioners are the last people to know what's happening in communities. If you do get brought to your attention anything that would be a concern, even if it's a location, I know councillors have previously brought that to my attention. If you're not sure about how to raise that, I'm more than happy for you to come directly to me and I'll pass that information on.
Thank you.
Alison Teal.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here, Helen, and your report. I've just got a few questions. I'd like to know, what are the typical qualifications to become a key worker? What is the frequency and type of, would it be typical for the same key worker to be assigned to the same family? And how are you going with key worker retention? Thank you.
Okay. So if, and I didn't get a chance to write those down, Councillor Teal, so please prompt me if I forget any of the questions we're going.
Do you want to do it again, Alison? Just
Sure. So yeah, what are the typical qualifications for a key worker? What is the frequency and type of supervision of key workers? For how long would a key worker be typically assigned to a family? So is there, I'm interested in continuity. Yeah. And a key worker retention, is that good?
Yeah.
Thanks, Alison.
I'll start with the qualifications. So there are, we do ask that people have some qualifications, but equally experience can mitigate that. So if we've got some very experienced practitioners, particularly, we get a number of applicants who have done voluntary sector work, who've worked in the community, who've worked in schools, for example. So qualifications are relatively flexible, but you do need to have a certain ability to be able to obviously communicate, operate the computer systems, etc. Frequency and supervision type, we have monthly supervision for all of our workers, and that includes personal supervision, and for those that are key working, that includes case supervision, where we attempt to talk about as many of the children that are on their caseload as possible. The way that they do that is that they prioritise based on children that they're worried about, but over a 2-monthly period they will definitely talk about every single child that's allocated to them. They do have quite, well, not comparatively, but I think they're quite high caseloads in terms of, we ask that they work with 12 families. Compared to other areas, other cities, that's a very low number. But actually, when you think that some of those families might have 3 or 4 children, you're talking in the region of around 20, 22 children per allocation, which is in line with our social workers, and we know that definitely keeps them busy. So it does take a long time for managers to talk to them about all of those children. In terms of how long they're assigned to a family, wherever possible, and this links into the retention question, we will assign a key worker who will keep that family until it's ready for closure. Now, I know from looking at our turnover and our throughput in the mass service that more often than not, we offer support for around 3 to 6 months. That's generally how long it takes. But equally, unlike colleagues in social care, there isn't the same pressure to close working with a family. If a family needs early help, it's not seen. If a family needs a social worker, we don't really want them having a social worker for 1, 2, 3 years. But in early help, if that family needs that level of support and everybody is clear that that is achieving an outcome for that child, there is less of a pressure to have to close those cases early. So generally speaking, between 3 and 6 months, and we would always try and make sure that they have the same worker. But some families have been receiving mass support for years. And on the most part, that's a positive. There are odd occasions where what we find through supervision is that actually the reason they've been open so long is because we would describe it as drift in children and families, and that means that we've not perhaps done everything that we needed to do. Those cases are picked up through supervision and through quality assurance and the performance monitoring, so we look more closely at families that have been open for longer than 12 months. And obviously then if it means that we need to reallocate that, then we will, to make sure that that family gets the impact that they need. And then the final,
sorry, go ahead. I thought you'd finished. Sorry, go ahead.
The final question was about retention, and the retention is a challenge for us, but in a positive way. What we find is because there are few qualification requirements when people come into service, we get a great deal of interest whenever we go out to recruitment for the mass intervention workers and the key worker roles. Always a great deal of interest, and some fantastically brilliant candidates apply. What that generally means is that quite a number of them go on to do to achieve qualifications, to go on to other supported roles, to go on to other roles, usually within the council. To be fair, we don't lose a lot of people to other areas. We certainly don't lose a lot of people to other cities, but occasionally we will lose people as they progress through our intervention, through the staff development that's available to them. We provide a lot of staff development opportunities, so they get a lot of training, they get a lot of experience, and they maximise that, and then go on to continue to work for these children and families, but in a slightly different area. Which is a challenge for us in terms of managing that continuity, particularly where children have been open to workers for a longer period. But equally, it means that we're getting the best people and they're providing a really good service whilst they're allocated. So it's something I do toy with regularly, but I think it's probably in the best interest of those children and families to get such good workers in the first place, and we certainly don't want to hold them back. We get very few people who leave because they don't like it. Like literally, I've been here for 3 years, and I think I only know of 2 who thought that work was not really for them when they've got to grips with it. But we do get retention is a problem for us. Recruitment isn't though. We have no issue recruiting staff to replace people.
Yeah, that sounds good. I was just checking on burnout, so that sounds really positive. Yeah.
I must admit, Councillor Teal, that whilst we've not been seeing people because of the remote working, burnout has been a concern for us, and we've tried to do regular virtual team meetings. We've tried to put a lot of support in place, including opportunities for people just to offload. We've tried to encourage team managers to sort of set up WhatsApp groups. I mean, it's all optional, but it can be a very draining role to be going out and dealing with what families perceive as problems, and we are very conscious of that. But we've not had a great deal of that happening, fortunately.
That's good. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Jackie, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add, I think echo everything that Helen said, but it's a good thing because our retention is, when they're going on often to become some of our social workers, aren't they, Helen? And we need more social workers, and we need social workers that will stay in Sheffield and have a knowledge of and a background in areas and things. So that's a positive thing. And also the other thing I think that's positive, I've been to parenting courses, you know, that parents come on courses, they become volunteer group workers, they become mass workers, and I've seen people go through, and it's almost like we do grow our own in Sheffield, which is good, because we can't compete on the salary, you know, how much people get a salary, but we do try as much as we can to give them the support through the supervision and support through training and support, because that is vital. And the point that you made that Helen made as well, about the people feeling isolated. People have felt these times have been difficult times, haven't they? And we are doing a lot to try and make sure we're supporting them through that too. So thanks for the questions.
Okay, thank you. Have you finished, Alison? Yeah. It's Mike Levery.
Thank you, Chair. I've got questions in 2 broad areas. So I wonder, one is about finance. So under 4.9, about the recruitment of additional staff, we did recruit to those 22 vacant posts, and you said that future vacancies will not be recruited to as the additional funding ends at the end of this year. That's correct. When it rolls over into next year, those 22 additional staff, how has the finance rolled over to cover for them? Because I presume there's not 22 leaving next year, or we're going back to status quo. So could you explain that bit for me, please? The second element is we've got a plan to put £2.5 million into children's services for next year, for which MAST is covered. Can we have a bit more about what's happening there? And does some of these staff come within the £2.5 million? Thank you. That's the first area.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. I can answer the first part of the question. The second part, I will do my best, but I might have to get some more information because I'm not entirely sure that I understand whereabouts the 2.5 million is fitting and specifically what that contribution is paying for.
And I was just going to say, could you just explain where the 2.5 comes? Because I think it's a bit complex, isn't it? If you've got a particular budget line, it would be helpful to know what that is because it's difficult to know. I was just going to say the money that came in for the MAST workers wasn't just a one-off. It was it will roll over.
Okay.
So that's my understanding. I don't know if Helen knows more. And also we are always we're saying that we do need more money in children's services because we know that as Helen started when she started her presentation, we have more demand. Demand was going up and complexity of needs and the complexity of the children and young people that were coming into our care before the pandemic was rising, and we've seen it rising further during the pandemic. You know, we were a very as a local authority amongst the core cities, our numbers of children in care were low. They weren't the lowest, but they were low. And we've always strived to make sure that we get children through, get them back to their families when they can. We've always done audits on whether they should be there or they shouldn't. But nevertheless, now we're seeing it rise. And we know that we're, as compared to core cities or our comparable local authorities, we actually have less, we spend less per child on children and young people. So we know we need more. The difficulty is, you know, we've had 10 years of cuts. I don't need to tell you all here in this room that no, we've had 10 years of austerity, 10 years of cuts, and the pandemic has given us more money, but it's been deliberately given to certain areas, some of which we've used in children's, but a lot of it has been for people who are shielding, food parcels, those sorts of things as well. So, but I think we all need to keep on saying we do need more money for children's services and children's social care. And if anything, I don't know whether you'll be looking at, I know it's the overall health thing, but the new white paper on the new way for health and social care, I can imagine it being on in the other scrutiny board, the health scrutiny board. But I don't think when they talk about social care, people tend to think about adults and they don't think about children. So anything that, you know, this scrutiny board could look at and challenge on making sure it does include children's would be great. Sorry, that's just a little an advert, but it would be great to know what the 2.5 is. Sorry.
There's little in that white paper about social care, full stop, and there's nothing about children's. So I just thought I'd chuck that in.
Yes.
Mike.
Councillor Lavery, in answer to just to build on what Councillor Drayton said, the additional funding, so the funding for MAST is secure, and we know that Cabinet have agreed to continue that. There are no issues whatsoever. In order to be able to recruit those additional 22 posts, we used some specific funding. We asked for some specific funding from the COVID relief monies. That we were able to stretch that over 2 years, so there isn't an issue this year because we got enough money, and then by the time we'd recruited people, we know that that money will be sufficient. And actually, over the course of the 2 years, there will be 22 people that will go on to progress and achieve other roles within that service. So if we need to, we will be able to come 2022-23 to manage without that additional funding. However, obviously that will mean that we don't have the additional 22 posts anymore. So that's our substantive amount. And the 2.5 million, I can tell you where the MAST funding comes from and what we spend it on, but I don't know specifically about that. So it might be better for me to contact Mark and get the detailed information and provide it to you.
Thank you. My second questions around early years and family centres. I don't get the sense that we've moved on very far with family centres. They were supposed to offer services 0 to 19. It appears that they're still doing a lot of, well, I say a lot, quite a varied amount of 0 to 5 stuff, children weaning services, stuff like that. And there's also a wide range of what the family centres offers, dependent on where you are. You know, so some are offering 1 or 2 services, some are offering various things. And I noticed when we've gone for the online offer, which is quite extensive and across the full range of 0 to 19, are they going to be reflected back in normal day-to-day operation, if you understand what I mean, in the family centres themselves? Are some of those courses that are available there going to be built back in? That's the first question. And my second question is, how are we getting to the most vulnerable children through online services? Do we know we're actually reaching them? And particularly the single parent families with drug and alcohol problems. Do we know they're actually, we're getting there? Are they being registered? And if they are being registered, are they actually being followed up? So I've got some concerns about early years and family centres. Thank you.
I'm afraid, Councillor Levery, I'll have to start with a caveat that I'm not responsible for the early years provision. So I do know about it because I work very closely in order to make sure that that offer is a 0 to 19 offer. But there will be some specific questions about the role, particularly of some of the officers in there, that I'm unable to answer, unfortunately.
I wouldn't mind just giving a chip in here, because I get updates on what the family centres and have been doing over the pandemic, and they've done a fantastic job. Obviously, some of it online, but some of it still being open. And you're right, a lot of the services have been for younger children, Councillor Levery, that, you know, that the perinatal stuff, you know, the postnatal stuff with smaller children, and midwives are still going into some of them, certainly, and health visitors are doing that. And they've been working hard to keep the parenting groups going that they're doing, and they've got a fantastic use of support for dads, as well as support for mums, as well as support for families, and they do great work, and that's still going on. I know that we did some really good work. This is pre-pandemic again, around sexual health in some of our family centres for those young people, the older age type, that and certainly in areas where that, so we've used family centres to provide that information about sexual health. I think there are ways in which we need the early help review will certainly look at how we're merging the two, as Helen has said, because of the work that was going on predominantly in schools. There has been a bit of a sort of, I think, a disjointedness, and I think that's not to say I don't think things are going on. It's how they link through in that seamless way. So I just think they have been doing a brilliant job with the families and making sure we're keeping sight of families. I'll leave for Helen, but I know we're doing a good job on that as well. But Helen, do you want to come in?
Just, I suppose, just to build on that, Jackie, and say that the plan is definitely to move that online offer, which is across the 0 to 19 age range, into actual delivery once we're able to get back into buildings. MAST have always worked very closely with the family centres, so have always been providing an offer up to 19, well, up to 25 actually, for children with special educational needs from those buildings. But I think where perhaps some of the gap was around that youth offer, because we previously, that commission service had their own buildings and were less willing, less likely to operate from the family centres. Actually, now that offer is in-house, I know that Laura, the head of service responsible there, has been working very, very closely with Lorraine, Nicola and I around how we make sure that there is a seamless offer when we are able to get back out into those buildings, and certainly that's how we were able to develop the online offer. And there is more than is currently in that online online document that we're planning to be able to get in the buildings once we're allowed. We've also really, it's interesting and what you can do when you've got to. We've also really pulled together as a result of the pandemic. So quite quickly, despite the council's position being that we would work from home where possible, we knew mass staff, even though their early help, would need to be out and about in the community and would need to be able to be accessing children and families in their homes to give that much needed support. So when we got approval to be able to get them back out in the community, we've worked very, very closely with colleagues in youth services, with the schools, with the health visiting service, with our midwifery colleagues, with GPs who have so some of the barriers to information sharing that we experienced pre-pandemic have very much been addressed, overcome and are now resolved in order to be able to enable us to share information. And one example of that would be the work that's happened around that neuro pathway. So the children that were on the waiting list for autism diagnosis, who perhaps had not come to the attention of any professionals other than those health professionals yet. We've made contact with all of those to make sure that they are safe, for want of a better description, during the pandemic, that their parents are still able to provide, that we've spoken to the children, we've done visits to those children, we've visited all of the children that were on the NHS shielding list to make sure, or that were living in families that were on the NHS shielding list to make sure that those children are not being overlooked as part of the pandemic. And that's on top of the 2,600 children that are currently allocated to the mass service. So we absolutely have, I'm loath to say that we've managed to make sure that every single child has been able to access a service, because I think until we come out the other side of the pandemic, we won't know for certain. But I think definitely the professionals that have been involved have done their very best to try and make sure that they have.
Yeah, I do agree, because I've spoken to the mass team in the north, and they are finding some very vulnerable people and pointing them at the children's centres, the family centres, which is a bit of concern, because I don't know whether it should be driven by the family centres or the mass team as to who's responsible for picking up these vulnerable parents and single parent.
I think they would see themselves as all, I know that I've said that they're managed in a slightly different place. I think operationally they would see themselves as all being the same team. So if they come across either way, if the family centres, you know, sometimes particularly when the family centres have food banks, for example, operating within them, they will very regularly speak to the mass workers and say, can you just check with this school about this child, or can you check with this GP about this family that came here? They very regularly work together. So I don't think they would perceive it being an issue that they're coming across younger children and they're signposting them there. It's just about making sure that when they get the support, it's the person that's got the best skill set to support them. And I think that's why we've made a differentiation between early years and school age children. I don't think the work that they do is significantly different.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Cliff, followed by Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in the early help review, you in section 5.4, you point out some shortcomings in the use of data, how it's collected and recorded in silos, and you can't get health data for early years, and the data is not used for effective predictive analysis. Am I right in thinking that this is going to be a work in progress for you?
It's definitely a work in progress, Councillor Woodcraft, definitely. And actually, again, the pandemic has resulted in some amazing progress, things that would have taken us years to achieve previously, that we've somehow managed to be able to get information sharing established, which is incredible, really. I think the challenges that we still, what we're trying to work on particularly is to create a system that will pull it all together. So although we've got the information sharing mechanisms in place, so the health information is now available to us, whereas previously it wasn't, it comes in on its own. So we look at that in isolation because it's on a different system. Nicola Shearston's leading that particular work stream, and she's already managed to get agreement that the early years data will go on the same system that our children's social care data is on, and that the early help data is on. And that feels like it's a really sensible and small thing, but actually getting that in place firstly, getting a system provider that would enable us to do it is fantastic, but getting that in place has been quite a challenge, and it will make such a massive difference to our staff because they will be able to see all of that information. The other thing that we've done to mitigate, because getting one information system is definitely a work in progress, I don't think we'll achieve that within the next 12-24 months. What we've done is really increase the robustness of our screening. So the social workers, massed workers who receive referrals, receive information, now consistently look at information on all 5 systems. So they've got access to some of the health information that would be relevant to us. They've got access to some of the education information that would be relevant to us. And they now pull that together, which we're hoping one of the outcomes of the review will be that that's then used to better decide who is best placed to be that key worker. So we get the right experience and expertise, and we can have a really open and honest conversation with children and parents when we go out to meet them for the first time. The screening team makes contact with every family that's referred in. They try and speak to their children too, albeit some of them are less willing.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you.
Fingers crossed that it's an exciting piece of work.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Go on, Jim.
Okay, so Helen, you've referred to some lessons learned over the last year in terms of pandemic and lockdown, working from home, about service delivery and how the mass team is actually delivering it, which is good. I suppose I'm specifically also interested in about how that may have been reflected in lessons learned about where mass teams are actually based. I don't want to go into the specific detail, but publicly, but I'd welcome a chat with you about it. But I do think there's an issue, often an assumption that somehow locally based workers mean that it's more sensitive to locally based services. I think that's sometimes a myth. I'm slightly skeptical about that. It helps, but it's not necessarily follows. So are there any lessons that you think that have been learned about where mass teams are based? I'm not talking about the family centres in terms of delivery, but actually where desks are. And that arguably could be desk space that is at the expense of local community organisations as well, to put it bluntly.
We've learned, so one of the pre-pandemic, one of the main work streams was about co-location, about looking for buildings that we would be able to co-locate a number of practitioners in, on that very hypothesis that you just mentioned, Councillor Sankey, that is around actually if we get people sitting together in localities, they will be better placed to meet that locality need. I think the biggest reflection that we've acknowledged is that actually our services have been responsive and able to deliver from a remote location. So whilst there are some benefits to being in a locality when you're doing home visiting, if you're spending less time travelling, for example, then that's a real benefit because it means there is less wasted time out of your working day. But actually the administrative functions can be just as easily done for our practitioners at home or in a school or in a community building as they can in any of our council offices now. And that makes a massive difference. That means that we're no longer restricted to looking at where they are best based on connectivity or accessibility, but actually what we can do is reflect on where do we want them to be and what do we need them to be doing. So the conversations have shifted from co-location needing to be physically having a load of desks together, more to actually what networks do they need to be involved in, how are they going to access those networks to be able to gain that expertise about what's available in communities, where is it that, how can we arrange their caseload allocation, for example, so that they're best placed to be able to physically get to families more and more easily, and how do we do all that rather than physically where do we want them to sit because there's a council network connectivity. But I don't think we've particularly got an answer to that yet, partially because we're still in the pandemic, so the limitations to how we can work are still apparent. But I would certainly welcome a conversation if you've got ideas about how it would work. Because we've been in the pandemic, I don't think there's a particular model out there that we could say, yes, we want it to work like that. So any suggestions will be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful answer, Helen. The one thing I'd say on the top of that is that potentially you're still going to have a competition for places with local community organisations if you're going to be based in community centres and schools, etc. And it's weighing those up in terms of any asset rationalisations. But I can give you an example of that. Okay, but that's really helpful. Thank you.
Question from Biggles.
Tango Alpha Bravo. You're clear for takeoff. Hello, Helen. In some respects, I think you in terms of my question, you probably alluded to it in the report, but at the end of the report, you talk about what this means for the people of Sheffield and obviously for the children of Sheffield. And you said that sometimes children and families have to wait too long to get the support they need. So aside from what you might have already alluded into the report, what are the barriers that are impacting on that timescale?
I'd really like to give a complicated answer, but the barrier is just the capacity within the service. So we know about more children. So I do want to reassure you that children do get support. We know about more children, and we know now about children much earlier. So I know we referenced the use of the data to form predictive analysis. Schools are now doing that, so they don't just wait for children and families to come and ask for help. They look at their data, so when attendance starts to drip, as well as obvious signs, they're then telling us about that and asking for our support, which is brilliant, but it means that the numbers of children and families that are being told there is support available has increased. And whilst they might not need that support as urgently as other families, what we don't want is for a family to be told they can have support and then them have to wait a long time to get it. But because there is a limited capacity at the moment for that key worker role, so they do get some support, somebody will make contact with them, somebody will be offering something, but the perception in the city, because we've done so well at providing early help, is that when you get early help, you get a key worker who's going to coordinate a plan, and there will be services available. And if they have to wait for that, they perceive they've not had any support for a period. So some families have had to wait too long for that key worker. And when I say too long, some families have had to wait in the region of 3 months, which is much too long, and 1 or 2 families have even had to wait longer than that. And we know that because we've got really robust performance monitoring and data. So it's not that those families are waiting and we've not had oversight. We know their needs are not as great as others, but we know that they don't. So what we want is to be able to develop that model so that actually more people can offer a key worker role, and we can make sure that families who want that support get it sooner. There isn't another sort of really clever way of me being able to answer it. We will be able to resolve it if we have more workers. I think the other thing that we've looked at, which was learning from the response that we gave to the families waiting on the neuro pathway as part of the pandemic. Some families, the majority of them like a visit, and from our perspective, a visit is good, because if we see children at home, we're much more assured that of the level of risk, because for a lot of families that need early help, their home is not a place of risk, but there are other things happening that mean that they're not achieving the outcomes we want. And what those families told us was that they were really pleased. We've done 1, 2, 3 contacts, a couple of visits, some phone calls, given them lots of information, and they felt on the back of that they'd got enough support. They were happy with that. Now, historically, that family would have been lower need. That family would have waited 3 to 6 months for that support. Well, we're looking now at a model that perhaps means that if all they need is 2 or 3 contacts, we can give that to them straight away, because it's not efficient for anybody for us to be waiting. But that's definitely a work in progress. That's the only slightly more complicated answer that I could give you.
Oh, thank you, Helen. That helps. Thank you.
Could I just pop in there,
Yeah.
Chair?
Sorry about that. My phone keeps ringing and I keep having to block myself.
Go on mute, yeah. So thank you. Just to echo everything that Helen said, but also to remind people the reason we set up the mass scheme in the first place, actually Colin, Ross and Andrew would remember, one of the reasons was about because we felt we needed to put more money into early intervention and prevention and support for families at the time they need it, which actually then keeps them out of care. You know, that's the point. And it leads to better, happier lives and more families staying together. So I think it's really important that's been a key role in how we've done the work in children's services. But I keep saying, and I'll go back to it again, we've had 10 years of austerity, 10 years of trying to manage that. And Helen's right, but we haven't got the workers because we haven't got the money. We need the money to put in to develop more workers, to develop more that wraparound again, because those children and young people and families are coming in, and we know over this pandemic it will bring us more. So we have to find ways of doing that, and we are trying to find ways of doing that. But I do think it's been a service as well that has been good, and it's been reviewed, and it's changed, and it's changing, and it's ongoing. We don't stick with, oh, we've done that now, so we give it a tick. We always look, and that's what we try to do. No matter which political party's in power, all of us have said we've got to do things to get the best possible services for the children, young people and families in our city. And how we do that is by reviewing what we're doing, moving forward, changing things, adding things. But at the moment, this is somewhere where I think we need more money, and that's the problem. That is a big problem. Our base budget isn't actually big enough. That's the problem. And so we need to get more money in our base budget, and then we can do the other things. But I wouldn't like, as Helen said, I wouldn't like anybody here, and if there is anybody listening, to think that we are doing everything we can to support families who need supporting and need that safeguarding, you know, around safeguarding. We are doing that. And as Helen said, perhaps they're not getting the service as soon as they want it, but that we still know who they are. So I think it's really important. But I just think it's just something we need to work on, really do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a brief comment, and I mean, for me, it's lunchtime. People are coming in with chips and fish and things. For me,
have they got
one
enough
of
for everybody, Chair?
Well, I've not yet managed a way of passing things through this. I'm trying to work that out. You know, it's like Connect 4, but not really, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that struck me is that MAST has been a point of discussion for many, many years, and I think hopefully it's now found a proper direction and a proper home, because it's been reviewed and changed and chopped and this, that, and whatever for a very, very long time. And so really what I'd like to just come out of this is that we as a committee take part in the review of the early years services. That would be the outcome that I'd like to see come from this morning. Okay. And I'm under a lot of pressure to finish this meeting pretty quickly. So if that's okay, we'll call that the end of that item. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Jackie. That's been informative. And now we're over to Alice to explain the work programme. Shouldn't take long, hopefully.
No, basically it's the last meeting this municipal year. So you've got as much information, all the things that you've looked at. Sometimes, and I put it in there, you know, as a committee, you agree what you might like to recommend to next year's committee, understanding that it's not known at this point in time exactly who that will be, and that a work programme does belong to that committee. But I have put a list of things that felt like you asked for a follow-up if it was going to be you again next year, and some of the key things that need to be kind of really kept an eye on and big core elements of the work. So it was really whether, you know, what's on page 41 and 42, are a right reflection of what you would like to recommend to next year's committee. And I can't believe that we've got to the last one of this municipal year.
Right, Jim and Mike, I think. And please bear in mind my fish and chips are going cold. Jim.
Yes, thanks, Mick. I just want to make a comment because, well, if this is the last meeting in the municipal year, this will also be my last meeting because I'm standing down in May. So what I wanted to say was that this has been, I think, just an amazing kind of workload in terms of the description done over the last previous year. Thanks.
You've gone, Jim.
This kind of pressure is kept up, really. Keep it up. That's my comment.
Yeah. Thank you. It's
and
Mike.
I'll ask public questions in future.
Mike.
Yeah, just to support you, Chair, on early years and family centres, because I think it's really is an area that we need to have a close look at. I don't think it's moved on since 2017, if I'm perfectly honest. And I'm not sure the family centres are fulfilling their role that they were originally intended to do. So I'm really interested in that. The only other thing I was going to mention was the Youth Council minutes. I know that we had quite a few actions out of that, and I'm not sure where we're going to review them. That's all. Thank you.
We'll find a way.
Thank you.
We haven't got a meeting set up now, have we, Alice? This is it, isn't it?
This is it. Because as much as anything, Chair, there is no sound anymore that the elections won't take place on the 6th of May.
Let's not go there with that. So if that is the case, can I just say thank you to all of you for your contributions and patience at times. I hope that if it's at all possible, you've actually enjoyed being on the scrutiny board, because I do try to deal with serious matters, but also in an enjoyable way. You've probably noticed I crack the odd joke every now and again. I'm not sure whether I should do, but that's just me. And I don't think we should all sit here just because we're talking about serious subjects with glum faces. So thank you for your contributions. It's been a pleasure working with you. Maybe I'll see some of you again next year, maybe not. And I am now going to go and get my fish and chips, which my son has kindly brought from the chip shop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.